Hello people, and welcome to the third part of this tutorial. In the last tutorial we created this color texture that we applied to our terrain, and in today's tutorial we're going to be creating some additional textures inside of Lightwave 3D. So let's begin. Whenever I'm gonna texture something, I like to go to layout and use the VPR just to get a like a real clue on how the textures are looking from the camera. So I open up the terrain where we left in the last tutorial, and now I'm gonna send this to layout, so I'll see you in layout in a second. Okay, the first thing we'll need to do is to change the position of our camera so we get a clear perspective on how the textures are performing. I just placed my camera near the terrain so I can get to look everything. And now I'm going to turn on the VPR. Now I actually like the color textures we created before. It's looking pretty nice here, but we need to add some additional textures to it. So we're going to create a diffuse map, a specularity map, and a bump map right inside of Lightwave. So let's open up the image editor, and we're going to create some copies out of this terrain. In order to do that, we just clone the texture by selecting it and going to the clone option, and we're going to use this first texture to create our bump map. So just as the displacement map, a bump map is nothing more than black and white information, so we need to remove all the color information from this image. So we have to remove our saturation completely. Okay, so I hope you guys change that. If you're having trouble moving your slider, just type here -1, and that's going to remove all of your color. Now let's add a little bit more contrast. And you know what? I'm mistaken. We don't have to add more contrast. Let's remove a little bit of the contrast we have in the image, because we don't want to have like a really harsh bump. So I feel comfortable with how this image is looking at the moment. Let's apply this texture image to our bump map. So open up your surface editor, and we're going to do something. I'm a little bit lazy, so I like to copy for example whatever I already have and paste it into the textures I'm going to modify, and I'll use that as my base. So I just copy the texture, and then I go to the bump map. I replace all the textures we had there, and we don't have anything there, so nothing is going to be visible. And now we just change the image. So we're having some sort of bump in our textures over here. Now this is looking good, but I want to add a little bit more, a little bit more bump, so it looks better. And in order to do that, we're going to add a procedural texture, and let's use a interior terrain. Now this is looking nice, but I think the size of the texture is a bit off. So let's change the size. And now we're getting something. Now you see we have modified a little bit our texture here, but there's something going on here, and is that this procedural texture, it's totally occluding this image map over here. So we just we have to change the blending mode from normal to additive. Now they are both mixing. I actually like this one this way. I'm going to move my camera closer to the terrain so we get to see the effect. Okay, I already moved my camera closer to the object so we get to see the detail that the bump is generating here. Let's open up once again the surface editor and let's see what's actually going on. So the procedural texture is adding some really nice variation to the texture of the terrain, but the color texture is not doing much. And what's happening is that once again the texture amplitude is probably not big enough, so we just have to increase that maybe up to 3. Let's pump it up to 4. Sorry. Let's pump it up to 4, and now we're getting some really nice detail from the image. So if we turn off the image, you can see that it's like completely flat. If we add the texture image with an increased amplitude, we're getting some nice variation, some nice texture variation. And if you on top of that add some procedural texture, we're getting some really nice and realistic variation to our terrain. So I feel comfortable with the way this is looking at the moment. So let's save up the object. We don't need to save the scene, we just have to save the object. So let's save all the objects, and let's move back our camera so we get to see a larger extension of the terrain. Okay, I like it that way. Now, in order to create the diffuse map and the specularity map, we'll have to load up our displacement image because we don't have it in the scene at the moment, and that's because we are working with our transformed object, so the procedural texture is not available anymore. So just open up your image editor and let's load up the displacement image we created in the first tutorial, and we're going to use this one as the diffuse map. So right now I think the image is too contrasted, and if we add this to the diffuse values of the texture, it's going to look weird. So I'm going to show it to you how it's going to look. So as I told you before, I'm a little bit lazy, so I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste it in the texture. Now as you can see here, it is using the same texture from the color option, so we just have to change this to the displacement image, and now it's really dark, so the image is too contrasted and it's not getting the variation we need to have. So let's change the values over here. So I want to increase the brightness of the image, and I think that's going to be perfect because it darkened the dirt over here and it's lightening up the grass we have on top of the mountain. So I feel comfortable with this texture at the moment, and we're going to use basically the same image to produce the specularity map. So I'm going to copy this one since we already have everything set here into the specularity value, and I think we are getting some nice, let's call it shininess of the grass. Now it's too shiny, so let's tweak the layer opacity so it's not as strong at the moment, and I want to invert this. Oh no, I don't want to invert this one. Okay, so let's change the opacity. Now the opacity is set to 20, so it's going to have some shininess, but it's not going to be shiny as a plastic. So I like the way it's looking at the moment. So let's save up the object. Okay, so I think we can go back to modeler where we're going to be creating our water plane. So I'll see you there. Alright, so we're in Modeler, and let's create our water plane. So let's go to a new layer and make sure the terrain is visible, so we get to see where the water plane is standing at the moment. And let's create, you know, a flat square, a simple square. So just use the box tool by pressing Shift X, and let's open up the numeric box. So this is the default, these are the default values, and as you can see here, it's a pretty small box. So we need to make sure that the water plane is going to match the length and the extension of our terrain. So the width is going to change from 1 meter to 1 kilometer. Once again, we don't need any height because this is going to be a flat surface. And the depth is going to be 1 kilometer once again. And we don't need to add any subdivisions. This is going to be a flat, completely flat surface. So that's fine. And let's add a new material. This is going to be called water. You can smooth it out if you want. And now the reason we're looking at the terrain itself, it's because we need to place this water plane at the proper altitude, so we get to cover the river path and the lake. So let's pull this one up. So now you can see here that we're partially covering the river path and the lake. Let's make sure we're watching up both of our layers. And I actually like the way it's looking at the moment. We're getting some you know, natural looking river path as well as the lake here. So I think we're going to stick with the way it's looking at the moment. Okay, now we just have to texture this. So let's open up the surface editor, and we have our water material here. Now there is a default library here in Lightwave, which I like to use as base for my textures. So let's open up the default library by pressing F8. Again. Oh, I'm sorry. It's F9 in Modeler and it's F8 in Layout. So just remember that, otherwise you'll be making the same mistake I was doing. Well, let's load up a preset water that comes with Lightwave. So let's go to, I think it's Nature. Yes, and we have a water here. Yes, and now we have this water material applied to our surface. So let's go back to layout and make sure, and let's see how it's actually looking. Okay. Right, so we are in layout once again. I already placed the camera where I had a clear view on how the river path and the terrain is looking. And it's too dark. I think we're not getting a real perspective on how the colors and the textures are performing from this point of view. So let's add an environment. So just press Control F5 if you have a Mac. Just Command F5. Let's add a gradient backdrop. So we're getting more of an ambient for our terrain, and let's rotate this light so it's actually the direction of the light, it's the same as the camera. Okay, so we can see here the terrain, the water plane. We just added the preset texture, but I don't feel really comfortable with this one. I think that the waves are too small, so let's increase the size of the waves by going to our surface editor, the water plane, and let's change the bump map. So Let's crank this up to 8 meters. And now we're getting some really nice bump on top of the water. Now I think that when they created this preset water, they were thinking of an ocean, and we're creating in a river, and rivers have a different color, at least in my home country Colombia. They look more greenish, so we'll have to tweak the color, but I think the overall look of the water, I don't feel really comfortable with it. I think it's too reflective, and I think it will be better if we use a different preset material. So we are going to mix some stuff from a different material and to create the water. So since I like this bump we just created, I'm just going to copy this one. So just copy all the layers, and we're going to use a different material for the water. So let's open up once again the preset panel, which in layout is you get it by pressing F8. And I think it will be better if we use a glass texture. Which one I like? I think this glass outside is going to look good on our water. Now our water is completely transparent, and we are getting that glassy effect. Let's add the bump we just got from the other texture. So we are replacing the bump, and now I think this water is too transparent, so let's change it up to 25%, and let's use a completely different color for the water. So we need to get like some sort of greenish color. So we don't want that much red. I think around 68 is good. Let's go about maybe 39. It's looking good. And let's decrease the blue. It's too blue at the moment, so maybe pulling comfortable with this greenish color over here. And let's pump up the diffuse by 80. And let's increase the transparency a little bit more, maybe 50%. And now we are getting that sense that the water is sort of transparent, right? I think it's too transparent at the moment, so what about 40%? And now we are getting that natural green color from a river water, and we're getting that sense that the water is actually a little bit transparent. So I feel comfortable with the color at the moment. And let's move back our camera so we get to see the whole scene. And I think it's looking pretty nice. I like the way it's looking at the moment. So you can tweak the color however you want, and if you want to add bigger waves, you can mix the materials we already created with something else, a different procedural or a different color texture you get from the internet. But at the moment I feel comfortable with the way this is looking. I'm going to save this object. So let's save all the objects. Well, I hope this was useful to all of you. Don't forget to check out the next tutorial, where we're going to be tackling some basic lighting and creating the trees for our scene. And well, if you have any questions, any comments, just let me know, and see you next time.